with all the admin out the way, that brings me to why we're all here, which is to discuss the findings of the RADICAL project. So RADICAL stands for Respect and Disrespect in Children's and Adolescents' Lives, and it's a landmark piece of research that worked directly with children and young people to understand and theorise respect and disrespect in their lives. It's a partnership project with the Centre for Children's Rights at Queen's, Ulster University, Strathclyde University, Belfast City Youth Council and the Scouts NI, and it's funded by the Economic and Social Research Council. The focus and design of the research was developed at the outset with an advisory group of children and young people, which in itself is a radical approach to research. And despite children and young people often being the focus of discussion, concern and censure around their lack of respect or needing to be taught respect, there's still little research on conceptions and experiences of respect and disrespect that actually involve children themselves. The project seeks to address this gap by working directly with children and young people to understand and theorise respect and disrespect in their everyday lives, and then hopefully to use this to inform policy and practice. So with that, it's an absolute pleasure to have Dr. Siobhan McAllister, Cara Curlin and Grace Allison here today. Thank you all so much for being here. And it would be great if you could introduce yourselves and then briefly explain your role and what you did as part of the RADICAL project. Whoever can go first.
Yeah, so I'm Siobhan McAllister. I'm a reader in criminology at Queen's, and I was the principal investigator for the project, which kind of involved overseeing the project and being involved in data collection and working a lot with the advisory groups.
Hi, I'm Cara. I've just finished my second year of law at Queen's, and I was a co-researcher on the project, and I helped throughout the entire project.
Hi, I'm Grace, and I'm in year 13 in school. I'm on the Young People's Advisory team, and I also helped, the same as Cara, with the research.
Awesome, thank you guys. Before we get into kind of unpacking the research findings, it'd be good to have some kind of scene setting of where this all came from. So both Cara and Grace, why is respect an important topic for children and young people, and why did you get involved?
So we got involved through Belfast City Youth Council because they were working in collaboration with the Centre of Children's Rights. And I know for myself, I was doing sociology A-level and I was really interested, especially because there wasn't anything on age discrimination in the entire course, and we were kind of told to ignore it because it won't really be asked. And it just seemed interesting.
Kind of similarly to Cara, I was very interested in it, but the difference is I joined a little bit later on. I wasn't there from the very beginning of the project, but I mean, you never see anybody talk about ageism and disrespect in children's lives anywhere. I mean, you see ageism in terms of older people and like the older generations and, you know, against the elderly, and there's all these laws put in place, and that's so good and so important, but like we never have that for young people, and I thought that it was so refreshing to see an initiative taken toward that, and I wanted to be a part of it.
Awesome, thank you guys so much. To Siobhan,
what
were the objectives of this particular project?
Yeah, so I think you covered them quite well kind of at the beginning. And as we've all said, we kind of hear this concept, this idea of respect all the time. It's used in everyday life, but actually we don't really take a lot of time to think about what it means. And importantly, it's often used about children and young people, but we don't really know what it means to them. How do they understand it and how do they experience it in different areas of their lives? So the project and the idea actually came directly from children and young people. Before Cara and Grace's time at Belfast City Youth Council, our colleague Michelle Templeton was doing a piece of work with the Youth Council and asked if we were doing another piece of research, what would it be about? And they had identified this issue about respect and disrespect. So that's kind of where it came from. it was, as you said at the beginning, it's very much about working directly with children and young people as research participants, but also as co-researchers to design the research and to think about kind of how do different groups of children and young people understand, respect and experience it. What are the practices that facilitate respect or are barriers to respect? What are the structures and processes that kind of impact on our experiences of respect and disrespect? And we did that through lots of techniques. We started with our colleague Claire Cassidy in Strathclyde University. She works on a process of philosophy with children. So she worked with the advisory groups from the Scouts and Belfast City Youth Council very early on, just to try and philosophize about, what is respect? How do we understand it in an abstract way? And what that did was it gave a working definition that we went into the project with from children and young people's understanding. So it wasn't an adult-grounded approach. And then that was then put into practice and tested out and more data collected through surveys. So we had a survey with 10-year-olds and a survey with 16-year-olds, which were co-designed by the younger advisory group from the Scouts and Belfast City Youth Council. That was completed by about 5,000 children and young people. We then had dialogue hubs, which were places where we talked about kind of spaces and places where children and young people experience respect. And then we carried out narrative interviews, which maybe, Cara and Grace will talk a bit more about those particular groups that we felt might experience respect and disrespect in particular ways. And talking about that in a group context maybe isn't most appropriate. So those particular groups that we wanted to talk to collect their experiences. Yeah, so we have spoken, over a period of 2.5 years. We've collected data from lots of groups in lots of different ways to come up with our conception of respect and to get a real good understanding of what it means for different groups.
Perfect. Why is this project so different in terms of? I mean, you spoke to it a little bit about how it was kind of built with young people and designed through that lens, but what makes it so different and how it actually involved young people directly, and what's the benefit of doing that, do you think?
Yeah, well, the project kind of is led by the Centre for Children's Rights at Queen's, so we always take a rights-based approach to research with children and young people, and Laura Lundy was part of the research team, so we implemented the Lundy model of participation the whole way through. So our advisory groups were key to that. If we're talking about meaningful engagement and participation, we have to do a lot of kind of work with our advisory groups to build their capacity around what research is, how to design research, but to learn from them as well what works and what doesn't, and to put that into practice. So the groups were involved, so there was a younger age group as well. I think it's really important to note that, we had 2 age groups, so the younger age group were from about 10 to 14. And then the Belfast City Youth Council were involved in designing the methods of data collection, like survey questions. Some of them went out and co-facilitated the dialogue hubs with us. They were involved in analysing the data, and they've been involved in lots of the outputs. So for me, there's a huge amount of outputs from this project, and they're not just academic outputs. And again, Grace and Cara can talk better to that than me in terms of some of the things they were involved in.
Well, excellent segue. I was just about to ask Grace and Cara. It'd be great to hear what some of your reflections are on your experiences of actually being co-researchers in this.
Yeah, I don't mind. I sort of, again, I'm kind of just echoing exactly what Siobhan just said, but being directly involved in how the research is carried out, what the research is carried out on, and being a part of the entire structure of the research, that changed everything for me, I thought. Usually, I think in terms of young people and the research that carried out on young people, you find that in a lot of cases, it's guesswork, really. Politicians, youth workers, like people guess how to interact with young people and what would best work and best suit them. Whereas whenever you have the young people that are actually involved and actually incorporated in the work and building the structure, you'll find that it's much more effective, because not only are you showing them that we are actually willing to listen and what you're saying is important and we're going to work on it, but you're allowing them to guide you in a way as to what's important. And how they best want to be communicated with to then get the best results for the research. So I thought, as being a co-researcher, it completely changed how I viewed the entire initiative. It made me want to be more involved, and it made me want to do more. I suppose it's like kind of a testimony as to why I'm here today, because there was such an effort into making my voice and so many other people's voices feel heard. So, yes, thank you.
Class.
Yeah, I definitely would agree with Grace on some points, especially with like the guesswork. It can be well intentioned, but when it misses the mark, it's not doing what they're hoping it does.
Yeah.
And it was really great being a co-researcher, just because the topic was about respect and disrespect, it made you think more about your interactions with other people and how you can maybe try and be more respectful now that you know what certain people are looking for in those interactions, and it makes you a bit more intentional of what you're hoping to get out of things. And it was just great to be involved in so many different types of research.
Awesome, thank you so much.
And could I just add as
Please.
well, some of the outputs that, again, a rights-based approach is about building the capacity of children and young people to advocate for their own rights. And, many of the young people, including Grace and Cara, have actually been doing that since the research is finished. They've been using the findings to do lots of, bits and pieces as well. So they have done loads. So I suppose it's to also, recognise that this sort of work involves an incredible amount of commitment. And our advisory group stayed in place for over 2 years, and their youth workers as well, facilitated them in that. So it's great work to do, but it involves, a lot of commitment from the young people.
Big time. Thank you so much, guys. I suppose moving on to some of the findings from the research. Siobhan, maybe you can take the first one. But what has the research told us about how children and young people define respect and disrespect?
Yeah, so I guess that was one of the core aims of the research, was that our understanding of respect and disrespect is really adult defined, that theories and philosophies of respect are generally written by adults about other adults, and we don't really know a great lot about children's experiences, and there's lots of kind of common misconceptions, that children need to learn respect. Adults almost like naturally have it, but children need to learn it from adults, and that teenagers are disrespectful. So a lot of it was about kind of troubling those common assumptions and thinking about, what does respect actually even mean for a child and a young person. So through the surveys and through the many methods we use, we kind of tried to look abstractly in a way, but then experientially. So I suppose unsurprisingly, a couple of themes kept coming out. Listening, respect was about listening, so it was about particular forms of communication. So that was very important. It was also about kindness. So about very particular kindness and caring behaviours, and about particular values as well around valuing difference and inclusion. We did find a couple of differences across age groups for the younger children, which was the value of having two different advisory groups as well. Kindness was really key to a lot of their discussions and in the survey as well. But as young people got older, into 16, not just listening, but being taken seriously was hugely important as well. So I think that's kind of in terms of our definition of respect. And then all of those things, of course, are experienced differentially on the basis of kind of identity and background. And that's, I think, what came out really, really importantly in this study, is that actually age is key to experiences of respect and disrespect. And then that's layered by all the other social identities of gender, class, ethnicity, etc.
Cara and Grace, would you like to talk about some of the key findings that kind of stuck out to you personally?
Yeah, so I think obviously as a young woman, you're definitely drawn to the stories and statistics of young women involved in it as well. We were actually able to make a list of maybe groups we'd want to prioritize in our research, and I know myself and a few others were really interested in getting disability involved because, I mean, even for myself, I think sometimes you don't view health as an issue for young people. And that's why I'd really want to focus on those issues.
I completely agree in terms of disability and gender. On gender, actually, there's something that I wanted to read out. This is my script from our Radical Lunch project in City Hall. And from the feedback that I got, this seemed to stick with a lot of people, this little extract here. So some man started staring at me, and he was like sniffing me and all. And I have a pure video of it, and he's sitting sniffing me. And I started videoing him like this so that he knew I was videoing him so that he would stop. It was actually really terrifying. So that was a bit of dialogue that we'd received from one of the surveys on, I think it was a young girl, and she had been just like using public transport. But then it really like gets you to think, like, it's those sorts of things that you want to focus on, because if you look at how young people are affected by respect and disrespect as one big picture, it mightn't stick out to you as much how individual characteristics and groups are affected until you break it down more. So, I mean, a couple of the main characteristics, as Cara so rightfully said there, was like gender, disability, and another one that I wanted to add in about race. I mean, I think the statistics was around like a quarter of young people said that they'd experienced racism, and you might look at that and think like, gosh, that's not a whole lot. But then in reality, you break that down and you find, well, it was actually only a quarter of the young people that were surveyed were ethnic minorities. That's almost every single one of them had reported experiencing harassment or disrespect based on like racist motifs, and that's not acceptable at all. And I think it's just like shows the importance of breaking down the research and using the research in such a meaningful way so that you are able to pinpoint which groups in particular are more affected.
I think that's a great point, and it's something that the advisory, and it's the value of having the advisory groups, at the very beginning, because while we all know, we all experience things differently on the basis of kind of our backgrounds and our identities, we were very focused on age, and the Belfast City Youth Council in particular kept talking about differences across different groups. So whether we're so the survey showed that 72% of young people had experienced discrimination of respect on the basis of age, so age discrimination. But how young children and young people experience respect very much differed by those other social characteristics. So like one example of that was like LGBTQ plus young people. So you could see like the layering of age with their identity, so to almost dismiss their how they self-defined, how they self-labelled. So age is important in and of itself, but age, when it's combined with another factor, gives us a much better understanding of how respect and disrespect are experienced differentially by different groups. And again, disability was a key one. How disability can be used to discredit or not listen to young people, but put age with that, and that adds this almost like double assumption about incapacity. Mm-hmm. So it was really important, I think, that the groups brought those issues to us to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. There's obviously a lot in there that is really concerning. Is there anything in particular that should really concern us and that needs real urgent action, or is there anything at all that can reassure us in any of the things that you find?
I do think in terms of, legality, that there are certain small movements that are being made in order to stop age discrimination and discrimination of all sorts. Notably, Sugden's Bill. I wrote my blog about that for Radical, about Sugden's Bill. And from my knowledge, I don't think it's went anywhere just yet. Hopefully it will. But even the existence of that bill, it's to do with young people and fighting against their discrimination in terms of like services and goods and transport. So that would have a lot to do with public spaces. There has been initiative taken to fight back against that, and I think that's positive. Whenever you look at the research and you look at the sheer magnitude of how many young people are being underrepresented and discriminated against, it's nice to see that we can use this research to create change and prompt movement so that this doesn't really happen again.
Yeah, I say we even did a session on how youth work was really positive for people, and there are still examples in different ones, like education, of when there is good practice that it makes such a difference. I think it just depends on whether someone thinks a young person is deliberately trying to be disrespectful, or if there's just a misunderstanding, because sometimes you do just interpret things differently because you're at a different stage of life.
Yeah, that goes back to the point about assumptions made on the base. So a lot of the disrespect that was experienced were about assumptions made on the basis of age, misassumptions, misrepresentations, misrecognition. So adults feeling that they, knew something, or that a young person in school was maybe, playing up, when actually it was that they didn't understand and they needed support. And I think Cara makes a really important point that, like, we looked at lots of different places and spaces, for public space. If you remind me of the rest of them. Education.
Youth work. And then
Justice, policing and justice, sports, online. And within all of those, youth work did come out in the surveys, in the interviews, and in the dialogue hubs, always come out very, very positively. And in fact, there was very little negative experiences in youth clubs of disrespect. So it is important to celebrate and to note the kind of the good news stories and think about it. What is it about those spaces? What is it about those relationships that are experienced as respectful? But also in some of those areas like policing and justice, for example, where surprisingly, even the younger children talked about disrespect, experiencing disrespect in relation to policing. There were also examples of respect. So what's really, I think, useful about the research is that even when, the majority of experiences were more negative, that actually we were able to pull out what makes a relationship in a particular situation or with a particular individual respectful. So as we can think about how can we learn from this research?
Yeah, absolutely. Are there we kind of touched on it earlier about the layering of age with other social identities and kind of how that impacts how young people feel respected or disrespected. But are there, if you'd like to kind of go into any more detail, I suppose, about particular groups of young people who, based on the research, more commonly experience disrespect or respect in Northern Ireland?
Yeah, even for looking at like relationships, girls did experience more frequent disrespect by a partner than the boys did. The girls were 25% and the boys were 15%. And the survey revealed that a high proportion of girls had experienced disrespect as sexism, and 62% of the teenage girls said they personally experienced sexism quite a few times compared to 31, so that's doubled for the girls.
I do think as well, on the topic of like ethnic and racial minority children and young people, this was for the KLT survey, so the survey for the 16-year-olds, and it was 64% of minority ethnic young people reported experiencing racism at least once. 87% of those identifying as non-white reported this, and then around a quarter of them reported that they experienced racism quite often. So I think that's horrendous. And then in terms of the qualitative data, it was racist comments in school, bullying linked to nationality or religion, or even abuse from strangers in public spaces, like out in the street or on public transport. I think I remember from the launch event, actually, it might have been Shushma, I think, was talking about it, and she had mentioned about from a girl had been walking down the street, and then she was interrogated about, where she was from, and there was jabs made at where she was from, and she wasn't even from that place. It was just generalising, based on her appearance and what she looked like. And like, I'm so grateful for this research because it shows how common it is. And I mean, if that's not something that you face in your day-to-day life, I'm sure it wouldn't be something that you immediately go to think about. And like Cara was saying, in terms of disability, I think that's so important, because if you live an able-bodied life and you never have to go into healthcare, or you never have to experience your day-to-day experiencing that level of just common disrespect and nobody really blinks an eye at it, seeing this research is so eye-opening into how people with disabilities have to live their day-to-day and what we can do to fix that.
And that's why it's really important, the mixed methods that we use, because, you know, when you look at the survey, like healthcare comes out really positively as a place of respect or disrespect. But then when we were in the kind of dialogue hubs and we started, like, it hardly came out at all. And when we started to think about why might that be the view that children and young people are treated respectfully there, it often wasn't based on experience. It was based on the view that, well, doctors have to treat everybody equally. But then when we went to the interviews and we spoke to particular groups like children with disabilities or LGBTQ, they had very different experiences in terms of not being listened to, not being felt they could make decisions about their own lives or about their identity, their gender identity as well. So it really shows the importance of using multiple methods and, like we said, speaking to those various groups, because respect and disrespect, not only is it experienced at higher levels for some groups, but it's experienced differently, you know. So, and I think respect is really important as well. Like, a lot came out in terms of disrespect, but what does respect mean? It was often like everyday practices that as Grace says, we maybe don't think of, you know. So, like, one of the things that, you know, minority ethnic young people talked about was people making an attempt to say their name correctly. Wasn't even getting it right. It was actually a sign of respect is somebody making an attempt to get your name right. The same with, you know, trans young people, you know, getting your pronoun right or asking. So, you know, they may seem like small things, but they're really important things. So what respect means differs, you know, for different groups. But and disrespect isn't always the overt racism. It's those subtle ways that you're talking about as well, where people are almost dismissed because we'll not bother asking them because they don't know, or we might not think they have anything important to say.
Yeah.
I did also, just want to say about, I meant to mention this earlier, about transgender individuals. I remember we were on that residential and so many of us were shocked because in the surveys it had came out that, you know, experiencing discrimination on the basis of, like, your gender identity and transphobia was so small. But then this is what, like, really gets me annoyed about the whole thing, because, you know, everybody thinks that, especially us in Northern Ireland, that we don't have as big maybe of a transphobia issue or like a homophobia issue toward the LGBTQ community, but there is such a big issue, because you find that even though there was such a small percentage there, you'll find that there was such a small percentage of transgender individuals that had been interviewed, and every single one of them had came back and said, yeah, I felt that I had experienced disrespect based on my gender identity or based on, you know, how I choose to identify myself. And, like, it's that sort of thing I really want to focus on in the research, because you have to break it down to understand the gravity that this disrespect and the impact it has in these certain groups. It just really aggravates me.
Yeah, and you know, it was, and one of the things that we did with both Cara and Grace were both involved, but some other young people, was we wrote a research briefing based on some of the survey data, and Dirk Schibitz, who's our survey expert and who runs the Young Life and Times at Queen's, he gave us loads of data for us to work with. And that was one of the things, you know, when we started to look at the data, you know, disrespect on the basis of age was high, disrespect on the basis of, like, religion around sectarianism was quite high, homophobia low, transphobia low, racism low. And it was actually, you know, some people in the group that said, are we looking at that just as from everybody, or can we look at that specifically for those who identify as trans or as gay or lesbian? So Dirk went back and was able to do that analysis, which is why we see, you know, 80 something% of those who identify as non-white actually had experienced disrespect on the basis of race.
Yeah. Obviously a lot of kind of really concerning things there. I think there's, what's kind of coming out to me is that there's this, like, systemic issue of how it impacts children and young people's access to, like, services and kind of wider things that they need access to, but also there's that, like, individual level of, like, how do you experience respect and disrespect just kind of interpersonally. And so there's obviously so much to cover in all of that, but I'd like to throw out to all of you kind of what we do with this now. You've identified so many important issues, and why is it important that this research is shared and understood, both by policymakers but also kind of by the general public and anyone that's interacting with young people?
So for me, I think that the key point here is a lot of the time, I think, me personally, policymakers and, individuals that are in authority over young people always seem to have the excuse that they didn't know that this was going on. They didn't know that young people were feeling disrespected. But now, with the radical findings and like the multitude of resources that we in the radical team have created, you can't just say you didn't know now, like you can't be ignorant, that's not an excuse. So I think because this research exists and it's something that they can be pointed toward, it, prompts them in a way to sort of take initiative and go, well, yeah, we have to do something about this because you can't turn a blind eye to it anymore. And that's what sticks out most to me. But again, in terms of legality, like things like Claire Suckden's bill on goods and services should be pushed forward. And I really would love to see there being, more people in support of the bill and wanting it to go somewhere, because for that to be passed would do wonders for Northern Ireland in terms of how it treats young people, and because we are so far behind in terms of like even the Republic of Ireland, England, the whole of the UK, they've been there, done that. Like I would love to see us be in the same position as they are now.
Yeah, I think something that should be emphasized is almost like term of knowing your audience. I think a part of the issue is you might be an expert, but young people might not have that terminology. So explaining it into the terms they know. I know there's a law centre, so using layman terms and just involving young people in decisions. So giving them options. If it's a disabled young person, tell them what support is there and let it be their choice. Since they didn't choose their ability, they can have some control in their life. And when it comes to policy, young people aren't like focused on bringing them in at the beginning. It's usually an afterthought of later on, just to make sure no one like can catch them on it. But it should be at the beginning, asking them, since it will affect them now and later on.
Do you have anything to add, Siobhan?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much in the findings. I mean, I think if we, in one respect, a really important thing, I guess, is the impact of disrespect on children and young people. And so that's really important that we pay attention to that, so it came out in all forms of data, in all places where children and young people feel disrespected, has negative impacts on their life, on their self-confidence, their feeling of self-worth, their attainment in school. But the survey in particular showed a statistically significant correlation between experiences of disrespect and poorer mental health. So both among children, so 10-year-olds who reported experiencing disrespect, assessed their mental health as poor or fair. And among the 16-year-olds, those who'd experienced all of those forms of disrespect that we talked about, those who experienced those or higher levels of them, also rated their mental health as poor or fair. So if we want to take something really tangible from it, and I'm not just about the statistics, because the qualitative research really backed this up too, disrespect has a negative impact on mental health. But then if we flip that and look at respect, when children and young people experience respect, they flourished. I think that was one of the words that the group used when we were looking at the data about how children and young people flourish. They want to attend, they have fun, they feel healthy, and they try harder, they're more motivated. And according to some of the young people, when they talked about what respect was like in school, they said they did better. So if we want to look at kind of those outcomes, actually the outcomes are better in that respect. So that might be something that politicians or policymakers are most interested in.
I will say that kind of positive element of it, and like having the data to back up the fact that there are better outcomes if you just respect young people, is really positive, and something I'm like patting myself on the back. And like in a response that we did to attendance issues, I was using all of these resources because I think it's really hammering home that point of like the outcomes will be better for children and young people if we just respect them and that they want to turn up and be there. So I like that kind of positive spin on it, because there are real kind of structural issues that are really negative and can get quite like, we already know that there are lots of problems, so using that angle is really useful. So what do you want to happen with the research? What are the sort of next steps, and where would you like it to go?
I I would want to see it be more commonplace that young people's voices are used as, the foundations of research, including young people. Like Radical is such a good start in terms of the research, and that's, again, like I had said at the beginning, it's why me and Cara alike were so interested in joining in the first place. But that shouldn't have been like an, oh my gosh, like young people are being included in this research for the first time, I can't believe this. That shouldn't have been the case. It should have been a commonplace thing. Logically, you would think if you're going to do research, on a certain demographic, on a certain type of people, you would include them in the research. But because it's in terms of young people, you just don't think. I'm not sure whether it comes from like a place of, oh, they're immature, or you just assume that they're not interested. But whenever you involve young people, again, I'm sort of just echoing myself from the start. You get the efficiency and the results, the outcomes you get are so much better. So if anything comes of the research, I would want other people to see the impact that Radical has had on young people and how it's helped. And I would want that to be mirrored again in other forms of research.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a good starting point. It's just even getting the research out there. We have policy briefs, obviously, well, not policy, but just briefings on different spaces. So if you're interested or involved in a particular sector, you can find out how it relates to you.
And I think your example there, I mean, it's great to hear that, Emma, that the research is being used. So that's really what we want as academics. And, the young people as co-researchers as well, that was one of the very first things that they asked at the beginning is, what's going to happen with this? So I'm sure we've all taken part in research as participants in that, then not kind of knowing what's happened. So for the research to be used and to hear it's being used in kind of consultation responses is great. We've also made attempts to do that too, and I think importantly so have the young people. So Rebecca, who's a member of Belfast City Youth Council, was really passionate about youth work, and because we have this data just about the sheer kind of quality youth work we have in this country and of the positive impacts of it in children and young people at a time when actually the funding for youth work was being unring-fenced. I don't know if that's a real word, but I'll have a go. But, at a time really when funding is so precarious, and we want to get this data out there and to use it for advocacy. So it was great to have Rebecca involved in that, to write a blog and to present on that to youth workers, for them to hear as well, actually young people, you're doing good here. Young people value what you're doing and you're doing it well. So, yeah, so that's what we would like. We would like the research, obviously, to be used.
Yes. Is there anything in terms of recommendations that you kind of want to hammer home now, or key settings or sectors where there's real urgent need for change? And then after this, I will start to field through some of the questions that we've got coming through. So yeah, if there's anything recommendations wise or specific sectors or areas that you'd want to think about.
I do think for me, public transport is a big one. I remember seeing in the research, like, even the extract that I read out earlier was from a girl who had been taking public transport, but my own experiences and even seeing like the results from the surveys, from the qualitative data, young people, especially girls, their experiences on public transport, it is so unregulated. Like, my hatred for the gliders is well known by everyone in this room, but I really, really hate them. They're so unregulated. I don't think enough is done for women and girls and young people. To keep them safe, to stop any forms of age discrimination. And I would really, really, really love to see something done about that. I'm not even sure what could be done, but just something, like an effort that's made to accommodate for young people when taking public transport, so that these acts of discrimination don't happen as often, if at all.
Yeah, just because every young person will have to go through the education system, that's obviously the biggest focus for this, because that's where most people will experience it. And we do have examples of good practice. So the takeaways are there if people want to look online and refresh, because you can forget things. just to go back and look and see what is working well.
Yeah, so that point that Cara's makes, each briefing has the very specific experiences of what does respect look like in these places, what does disrespect look like. So so there's learning there, for schools, for sports provision, for public transport, but also for different groups, for that point that different groups experience respect and disrespect differently. So I guess for me, the message is that it's about the everyday things, those everyday practices we can embed to think about, what is respectful for people. And if we know what it is, it goes back to Grace's point that we often use the excuse that we don't know. Well, we know now. So if we know what it is, then we make an effort to get things right and to be respectful. But it's not just about practices, I guess, is the other thing, and interactions. So, it's not just about teachers, for example. It's about structures and rules and institutions, so policies within schools, make it very difficult for, young people to feel that they can be listened to, or they can speak out in things, or they can express their gender identity when there's such strict uniform policies. So I think for me it's about remembering that relationships are important, but relationships are embedded within structures as well.
Awesome. We'll go through some of the questions that people have asked, if you don't mind. The first one we've got here is, will the research be repeated, and what advice would you give to others seeking to engage children and young people?
Well, I would assume it will be repeated in some form. There are multitudes of research that are being carried about all the time. But in terms of what advice I would give, if you're doing it about young people, I think probably sound like a broken record at this point, but include them. They should be the basis of your research. They should be helping you, build the structure of what you're asking. And, like Cara was saying earlier, don't leave it until after the fact to ask for their input. And
in terms of the research, we are in the Youth Council trying to focus more on young women's experiences of respectful spaces. So in terms of healthcare, education, justice, and online spaces. So we'll be looking closer at that.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I think this is great, and again, it goes back to that child rights-based approach that, so young people now the co-researchers have the skills and the interest, to design their own surveys, and we'll support them as much as they want us to, or not, in doing that. So they've taken an issue that again they're really interested in, but they don't need us now, and it is based on respect. So it's something that they're really interested in from the research, and I'll take it further in terms of repeating, the whole project. We don't have plans to do that. It's a massive project, and we have lots of data, and we've still writing on it. So while we have on our website, we have 8 briefings, I think, that we talked about. There were two more are going to be launched shortly. One on respect and disrespect in online spaces, as Cara was just talking about, and one, and as Grace was just talking about, respect and disrespect in relationships. So what we try and do when we put those out is that, obviously there's plenty of policy discussion around some of these issues at the moment around gender-based violence and online misogyny. So we'll try and link in to show how the data, can be used in some of those discussions as well. So I think our next focus is using rather than collecting more.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, another one. 2 questions here. Were any young Irish travellers involved in the research? And have you had any proactive contact from any executive departments or arm's length bodies like health trusts with an interest in using your research to improve their approaches and services?
I think maybe just because we've had our capacity built, we've been able to be proactive in engaging with them. I know since Eva and I and a mutual friend were particularly interested in disability, we've then gone ahead to create a campaign for a Health and Social Care Youth Board, because that's something we've seen in other countries and we should have it as well. So we've maybe engaged them from what we've discovered.
Brilliant.
Great. Love that.
We've had a number of events, so calls have gone out to various groups. We would have liked to have events that were specifically targeted, particularly, for example, around policing and justice. But to be honest, we ran out of time. If there are particular, groups or bodies who are interested, we're very happy as academics, and if young people are interested in free, we're very happy to present, some specific findings and some learning from the project. The other question about Irish travellers, I'm not sure, perhaps in the survey, but there probably wouldn't be, a large enough percentage that would be able to run any kind of statistical analysis on that. So that's something I would need to check.
Okay. Do you have anything to add? No? All good. Okay. There's a question here that says, was there an experience that made you feel respected by a practitioner, so like a youth worker or a teacher or anyone like that?
I think this sort of comes down to the core findings of the research and just feeling listened to. Like the difference in how I feel whenever I'm in a classroom and I'm engaging with the teacher and you can tell they want to listen to me and they're actually taking in what I'm saying, and they're not just sort of looking at the situation as, well, you're the student, I'm the teacher, and the difference that I feel whenever I'm in a classroom, and that is the case where it is just I'm the teacher, you're the student sort of way, is insane. Like the work that I get done, the quality of my work, how comfortable I feel in the class. So I would probably say just being listened to and being heard at the same time, and having my voice taken seriously. That's why I have enjoyed the Radical Project so much, because it's a chance for me to say what I feel and not be looked down upon, is that the right word? For like in a sort of condescending sort of way.
Yeah, and I'd say even like the researchers did practice what they preached, and they were really respectful, and whenever we, had feedback and we didn't agree with them, they would take it on board and they would tell us that they'll go back, they'll review it, and then they'll let us know what they come to. And even just being, kept in the loop the entire time was really important for that.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think we made a deliberate, we've been involved in lots of participatory research, and, for me, this has been the most kind of intense and long term. And like I say, we have a lot more output. So you learn as you go through kind of what works and doesn't work, and also that you just need to be flexible and more relaxed. I think I've learned to be a bit more relaxed. I say that, there's probably some people that wouldn't agree. But I think just in terms of the learning, what I learned from the process from young people as well, and we were writing a book chapter together, so we're talking about some of the outputs. One of these is an academic book chapter about engaging with young researchers, so it's written by the young researchers and some of the research team together, and to hear them talk about what we did, it was actually really validating, because it just kind of made us think, okay, so we are doing some things right, and I didn't do everything right, but that was really important, and I think the feedback was key. We made a real effort in this project to Muncie, who's our researcher. She's great with design, so she made these really visual updates that would go to one for the children's group and one for the young people's group, that would go to them every couple of months, kind of what was being done on the project, what we did at our last meeting, how we put that into practice, or what we weren't able to do and why, what the next steps are, who wants to be involved in that. So, and then we would even take feedback on those. Are they in the right format? Is there anything else you want in them? So I think, for us it was great learning through time of doing different projects, and then there'll be learning from this project that we'll take into the next one as well.
Very good. I have a question here. It says, are there any plans to involve primary age children younger than 10? Or was that considered at any stage?
Yeah, so to be honest, most of my work has been with young people, so most of my work was with the youth advisory group, who I think it was 14, the youngest in Belfast Youth Council. So my expertise is not in working with children's advisory groups. So Laura Lundy and Muncie did a lot of that work, and it was very different. And when I did go into that group to work with it, it's completely different set of skills, and particularly the Scouts as well. You know, it's short bursts of work and then and play. You know, and I had to learn through that actually just because I want to get something done isn't the most important thing actually, and that's not what it's about. It's about actually within those 10 minutes of time, it was about going away and realising actually there's really good stuff here. So I think I've increasingly recognised that there's different skills, of course, involved with working with different age groups. And yes, so the Centre for Children's Rights absolutely does work with advisory groups younger. It's just not something that I've tended to do. What's your view? Should we have more younger young researchers?
I think it really just depends if they're interested. Obviously, we got the opportunity through our participation in the Youth Council. So if another organisation was interested in reaching out, I'm sure you probably wouldn't say no.
I mean, I do think it would be a really lovely idea. I suppose just in terms of practicality, it's again like getting someone who would be able to facilitate it, but also it would be quite difficult, I think, for the younger children to maybe comprehend the more complex ideas of respect and disrespect. You'd have to find a way to explain it that they would be able to digest and respond properly. And I assume that would mean like there would be a complete change in the structure of like the surveys and things like that. And that it would have to be more, like you said, like play involved.
Yeah.
So
And I guess that's the point, that if you want to engage with different groups, you have to find the most appropriate way. So a survey might not be. But to be fair, you know, like the Scouts as well, we have young people who were involved in the Scouts for 2 years, you know, so that you only stay involved if you're getting something out of it or you enjoy it. So, you know, so their input was invaluable, but it wouldn't have happened without their workers. So, you know, my advice, and probably any researcher's advice, is when you're working with, you know, advisory groups, is you need to work with their youth worker or their volunteers. They were all volunteers in the Scouts. If we didn't have the support of them, we couldn't have done this project.
I was going to put, we've got about 5 minutes left, and I was going to put it back out to the audience. If there's any more questions at all, please fire away and put them into the chat. But also, I would like to ask Grace and Cara, what do you want everybody that's listening today to take away? What's your sort of final mic drop moment?
That's a bit of pressure. Gosh, the one thing. It probably sounds so stupid and simple, and again, I sound like a record player, but just listen to young people. Like, that is all we're asking you to do. Just take the time out of your research, out of your day, out of whatever you're doing, to listen and actually listen, not just listen to respond, but listen to understand and work on what they're saying and take their feedback and take it seriously, not as something that is seen to be like, oh, whatever, that, and also look at yourself internally and look at how you look at young people. Like, do you have these assumptions? Do you have these negative stereotypes? If so, why are they there, and can you work on them? Just, that's all I'm asking, I think.
Love it.
Yeah, I'd say even as just simple things, I'd probably come at it of more of a healthcare perspective of just like read the entire medical form, because just because someone doesn't maybe need medication, they still just want to feel seen. And that is part of feeling seen. And even just asking, is this maybe making you feel hopeful, or is it making you, you know, maybe feel a bit more jealous in a way? Just ask how it's making them feel, because otherwise you're going off of assumptions that might not be having your intended effect.
I'll ask you as well, Siobhan, if you like.
Yeah, I really like Cara's concept of being seen.
Yeah.
You know, and that was key to respect, you know, so it was not to have your voice ignored, not to have your gender identity ignored, not to have your disability ignored, actually to recognise these things and to respond to them. So it's really, I think the basis was, I think when we thought about respect and disrespect. It was about being seen and not on seeing. So don't on see disrespect. If you see disrespect or racism or sexism happening, particularly if you're an adult in a position of power and responsibility, don't let it slide. Don't ignore it. So yes, I really like that concept of being seen. See things.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much. This was awesome. It was great to chat to you all. And thank you to everybody online for joining us today. If there's anything else anyone wants to add, feel free. But if not, then I think we can
just a reminder about everything's on the website. All the resources are on our website. It's a Google site, so it's got a very long web address. But if you just search for QUB Radical Project, you'll find it. And on there is all the policy briefings, the pieces that have been written and designed by young people, videos co-designed by young people, blogs that they have written, podcasts. So there's loads of resources. We'd be delighted if people use them.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of your day. Enjoy the sunshine.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.